Oh, I
Hello,
love to
hello.
see that many that attended the last one are back here today. This is great. Oh, Erica. Don't mind our administrator dancing in the background. Welcome, everyone. Good morning. We're going to give an extra minute or two to see if anybody else joins us. But welcome to our Faculty Career Path series, Preparing Your Teaching Statement. Very excited. Let's just bear with us. We'll give them one more minute and then I think we'll start because it's like we had this peak of everybody joining and then, oh, Frankie. Yes, Evgenie, I don't want to say your name incorrectly. Awesome. Evgenie, we will absolutely send a link to the PowerPoint as well as a recording from the last one, and we'll do the same for this one and then the next one as well. So if you're unable
Thank you.
to attend one of them, let us know, and you could always email any of us, Diana, myself, or Ashley, and we will absolutely send that information for you. All right, well, once again, good morning. Welcome to Faculty Career Path series, Preparing Your Teaching Statement. I'm really happy to see some familiar faces and that many of you joined us last week. And this is part 2 in a sense, so welcome. Today's session is facilitated by Kim Bell from the Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching. So Kim, I'm gonna throw the ball to you. But once again, thank you for joining us this morning.
Awesome. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, everybody, for being here and spending an hour learning about teaching statements. So for those of you who haven't met me, I'll just tell you a little bit about what I do here in CELT. So CELT in general, we work with anyone on campus who needs help with their teaching, and I specifically work with TAs and postdocs. So I work with the CIE a lot. We coordinate the college teaching seminars, which is open to all grad students and postdocs on campus. If that sounds good to you and you haven't attended them before, we'll be advertising those prior to the fall semester. They'll start up in October. I run a large online TA training for new PhD students and master students that teach. Maybe some of you have been through that if you're a grad student here. And yeah, that's what I do and I love it. And I was a multiple graduate of Stony Brook, so I've been here for a long time. So again, thank you for being here. I'm going to share my slides up and I'm going to put a link in the chat. Sorry, I'm getting a weird phone call from Virginia that I definitely don't know the person. Okay, so I think I just put the link to the slides in the chat. Where did my chat go? There's the chat. But there's also a QR code here if you want to access them that way. All right. So I just want to do a little hello to get to know you. I don't know all the folks in here, but I do know some of you, and maybe you don't know each other. We have an activity later on, which I hope you stick around for. There'll be some follow-up steps after that activity, but that activity is going to help you get started. But before I even jump into the topics, let's just take a moment to introduce ourselves. So we're going to do this Chatterfall activity, which I just learned about recently, and I like it. Type your answers to these bullet points in the chat, but don't send them yet. We'll wait and then everybody will send their answers at once. So are you a grad student or postdoc or other? If you're here in the room and your staff, what program are you in? What do you do research in? And what is one of your hobbies? So before you hit enter, just save your answer, right? Just hold on in the chat box, but you can type it in. All right, so hopefully everybody has answered that or have their answers ready to go, and you can now send them. I also participated. Awesome. Thank you, everyone. So let's see what we got. Postdoc in public health, plays cricket, music, another postdoc in public health, research scientist, adult neurogenesis and its role in learning memory. Cool, cool. Running and multi-day canoe trips. That sounds adventurous. Grad student in gender studies. Hazy IPAs, love it. CIE staff. Hi, Diana. Composting, dollhouse miniatures, painting, drawing. Awesome. Neurodegenerative disease postdoc, knitting, reading. Oh, me too. Staff, grad student, higher ed. Hi, Carrie, nice to see you. Loves baking. Grad student, women's gender sexuality studies, crafting. Grad student, political science, music. Grad student, CS, Duolingo, learning languages. I keep getting emails from Duolingo telling me continue your Swahili journey, but I never started it, so I don't know why I'm getting those. PhD student in economics. Innovation behaviors at a scientist firm level. Oh, cool. Reading, especially mysteries. Postdoc in chem biochem, being in nature, grad student AMS, swim sports, and staff in CIE and running. Great. All right, so now we know everybody. Sorry to the person who just entered. If you want to introduce yourself in the chat, feel free. But I'm gonna move on now with the slides. So thanks everyone for participating in that. It's really nice to meet all of you, and thanks again for being here. So today we're going to define elements of an effective teaching statement, describe possible structures for your statement, and the structures I will tell you about are not the only possibilities. Identify topics and themes you can include in your statement, discuss your teaching values, examples, and stories in order to help you start to outline your statement. That's the activity we're going to be doing. And then plan the next steps for developing and writing your statement. People keep coming. Can I turn the waiting room off? Is that a thing I can do? Maybe Diana. I don't see that option in controls. Okay.
I removed it.
Great, thank you. Okay, so before we get started, I know you probably have heard these terms, teaching philosophy or teaching statement before. I just have a quick Mentimeter poll, which I hope works. I used it again this morning in a different presentation, and they've recently put a 50 participant per month limit on the free account, which is pretty stinky because I like this tool, but let's see how it goes. If it doesn't work or blocks us, we can type in the chat. But again, you can scan this QR code. If you're looking at the slides digitally, you can click the word brainstorm, that's a link, or follow the directions in the box at the bottom of the screen. I think I have it set here. Okay, so we'll see what everyone thinks. And again, the directions are at the top. If you didn't get to scan that QR code, you can just go to menti.com and put in 868-1944. Just give everyone a minute to get in there. What do you think of when you hear teaching philosophy, teaching statement, or what do you think should be shown through either of those things? Right? What are elements that go along with those? Cool. All right, so I'll just read out a couple that have popped up. A lot of folks said passion, right? That's the biggest one there in the middle. Practical, philosophy, style, staying prepared, effort, diversity, inclusive, focused, adaptable, I think I said already, innovative, motivation, engaging, right? So these are things that you can, the characteristics of you and your teaching and your values that you might want to make obvious in your statement. You want your passion for teaching to come through, right? This is a story about your values and what you've done or what you plan to do to bring that into the classroom to support student success. Absolutely. Goals, yep, for sure. Great. I'm still typing. Right. Thank you for that. And that's exactly right. So just some general guidelines, right? So there's these two terms, teaching philosophy and statement of teaching philosophy, or teaching statement, which is the actual thing that you put in your job application package. But your teaching philosophy, right, is just your overall way you approach teaching, what values are important to you, and again, how are you bringing that into the classroom? And you could even have like a very condensed version of what you might include in a job application package that is your teaching philosophy that you might include it on like a faculty bio page or your website or LinkedIn or whatever the case may be, right? So that tends to be a little more concise than a full statement, which, right, you're convincing a job committee to hire you to do some teaching. And in that, you really need the evidence piece and your plans and how you're going to carry that out specifically. So your teaching philosophy statement is a narrative that includes your conception of teaching and learning, a description of how you teach, justification for why you teach that way, right? Or evidence that this has been working, this is what your students are, how they're showing you that they've learned. So in the statement, you should demonstrate that you have been or will be reflective and purposeful about your teaching, right? Have you taught the same class more than once? Have you done teaching professional development that shows that you're thinking about how you want to take new approaches in the classroom if you haven't gotten the chance to do so? You're going to communicate your goals as an instructor and your corresponding actions in the classroom or plans for those actions, and provide evidence of your teaching effectiveness, right? These are really three really critical pieces. What have you been doing to think about teaching or do the teaching? What are your values? How are you carrying these things out in the classroom? And how have your students shown you that these things are landing, right? That you're having the effect of encouraging and having students actually learn the things that you're trying to get them to learn. Right, so back to that distinction between just the idea of a teaching philosophy, that's more based on the values, and you wouldn't necessarily include like all these specifics that you're going to put in the statement and all that evidence in a broader philosophy that they might ask you to put on your faculty website or something like that. Okay, so these are just 5 quick tips. I mentioned this already, but this is your story, right? Your chance to bring your own personal experiences and values to this piece of your job application. It shouldn't sound formulaic or cliched. You need to stand out some way, right, to make folks want to read this statement. So the more you can make it personal to you, your specific experiences, anecdotes and examples from your teaching or from your plans or from your training, whatever, and how that connects to your students' learning. So you want to keep it concise. The recommended length is about 2 pages, though some schools will take more. Sometimes if it's teaching only and you're not going to be doing research, they might ask for a longer statement. But typically, maybe not so typically, there was guidelines along with these when the guidelines are listed out in the job description or whatever the documents you have to submit along. But if it doesn't give you a guideline, a good idea is about 2 pages in length. And that can be single spaced. So a lot of information you could pack in there. Be sure to do your research, right? I'm sure you know this as part of the overall application process, but what kind of courses does this institution offer? What are their values on teaching? Go to the provost's webpage, go to the teaching center's webpage, see what kind of mission, value, goal statements they have. You can incorporate some of that language. They might say that, well, innovative practices are really important or inclusive practices are really important. But you could also just get a sense of, or, the department website might have example syllabi, or browse the course catalog for the department you're applying to. It'll just give you a picture of, how you can tailor these personal pieces and stories that you're telling to match the institution you're applying to. Especially, sometimes you might have a set of values, the university might have a slightly different set of values. This will also be a learning experience to you if, maybe this is a place you definitely want to fit into that culture, and maybe you need to tailor things a little differently. So citing the learning sciences literature, I have a little asterisk here for a few reasons. Number one, if you're not familiar with the learning sciences literature, this can seem very daunting, but I can help. I have examples later on of a few papers that and books like that, things that you can cite for different topics. But also, I'm here to review drafts, make other suggestions, as certainly your peers, get other folks to look at your statement as well, which is number 5. Don't just write a statement and submit it in an application package. Even if it's last minute, try to get somebody else to take a look at it. Just having some other feedback is super important. And of course, best case, you're preparing this ahead of time, and you can go back and forth with a couple of drafts and editing with a couple of different folks who have different perspectives on the topic. And if you have any questions or things to add at any point, feel free to interrupt. You can raise your hand or unmute yourself or type in the chat or whatever you'd like. So I have, in these next few bullet points, 2 basic structures. I've combined them into one set of recommendations that you can use for your statement. But again, this is not the only way to do this. And in the resources that I have linked at the end, you'll find other examples, and you might see different structures, and those are fine. This is just 2 places to get started. And these are structures that I commonly see when I'm reviewing statements as well. So you want to, you're structuring this sort of like a regular essay type thing, a story with an introduction, a middle piece, and an end. So you're starting out with your general goals for student learning and a description of your teaching values, right? What are these pieces that drive your passion for teaching? And again, how are you connecting that to student learning? Because just because we're standing up there teaching doesn't mean that the people in the room are learning what we're thinking they are, right? So those 2 pieces really need to be clearly connected in this statement. So the opening sentence, as with any good piece of writing, should hook your reader in. So again, you don't want to open with something very bland or cliched, but also nothing too extreme. And that goes throughout, right? You don't need to use like really effusive, flowery language. You want to keep the reading concise and clear and easy to read, but thinking about how, you're really going to grab the reader's attention to make it stand out from the lots and lots of other statements they're getting. So is there a story you can start with, some specific example from your teaching that somebody else might not have? That's always a great way to open. All right, and you don't have to get too personal with these things, right? Stick to what your experiences in the classroom have been, or if there's something that really inspired you to go on this teaching career journey, that is also appropriate. So then the body of the statement, you're going to give a brief description and additional details on, again, these are just options. You can choose, let's say 2 or 3 of like specific courses you've taught. Maybe you've taught an online course and you've taught an in-person course, or you've taught a large lecture course and a lab course, whatever. You could elaborate within that context and organize it according to course type. Or you can choose to structure it around specific goals that you might have for student learning or practices that you would use in the classroom. Things like active learning, scientific inquiry, science communication, whatever. And we're going to brainstorm a list of these things together in just a minute to get you started. So along with that general description or elaboration on either the course or this goal or practice you're going to focus on, what methods you used, and what were the evidence of its effectiveness, right? So if you're talking about using active learning, well, what strategy or activity worked well, or that you have experience with or plan to use? And, how have your students shown you that they're learning using that method? Whether you gave an assessment that, everybody did well on, or you got specific student feedback, or a plan for how you would implement this and collect that evidence, right? Well, I would do an activity and ask my students at the end, with a survey, what they thought. I mean, that's just a super brief example, but that's what I mean when I say evidence. And then you would just like repeat that, right? You elaborate through another example of a course or through another practice or goal that you might have. And then in your conclusion, you want to just provide this overall summary or idea of, well, this is what students will get from my courses. These are the courses I'm prepared to teach. This is the kind of thing I look to do in the department, or how I will integrate into the culture there. So looking ahead with some sort of institution specific closing as well, right? You want to wrap up all of those things you have done and make it clear how you're going to do that at the specific institution you're applying to. So you'll have to edit, right, at least the ending of your statement to match the different places you're applying. Right, so now I want to take a few minutes. I'm going to type. And you'll see on the left here, I have hidden slides of the last 2 times I did this presentation, all the topics we came up with. So I will unhide those before, at the end of today, so you can see all the lists and you just have lots of ideas to start with. But so either in the chat or unmute, what are some possible goals, teaching practices, or course contexts you could think of to create that kind of structure I just suggested? And you could unmute and shout it out. You can type
Hi.
in the chat. Yeah. Hey, Frankie.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. I was thinking like maybe, especially because we all went through COVID, it might be interesting to talk about specific like ways that we approach online asynchronous versus in person, and kind of highlight like a very varied experiences between synchronous, asynchronous, and in person, depending on like what we've done.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. Right? Like, how do you keep student engagement up in those different types of environments? How are you going to take these innovative teaching practices across those? So I'm just going to type that because I just said it out loud. Thanks. Great. What else? Let me open the chat.
I use I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, hi.
Hi. So when I do active learning, I use a lot of like writing and more drawing work, like, because when you're talking about like chemical pathways, development, neurodevelopment, all sorts of things, I find that the actual drawing work really helps solidify the concepts for the students.
Great. Thank you, Amalia. So I elaborated on that a little bit, but concept maps is another way to get at that. Not necessarily having to be graphical, but things that have a lot of pieces, right? Especially, biological pathways, things with a lot of different broad ideas that are connected together. You can, if you don't know what a concept map is, putting, the basic pieces in little circles or shapes around, and then you make deliberate connections with verbs to show the ideas together. And then you sort of can summarize whole topics, chapters, lessons, whatever, in a more graphical way. And it's a really good way to balance both, right, the heavy text, jargony content that you're getting in class and represent it in a more high level summary. And to go back and forth between those things is a really effective way to learn. All right, what else? Yeah, universal design. So I'm just going to write UDL and we'll see what that stands for. There's a lot of different, ways to think about this, but this is a framework that is strongly recommended. I don't know if I have a link to that here, but if you just Google UDL, right, there's all these standards and recommendations for course design. And it's a way that, you know, as a faculty member, maybe you've experienced this already. If you have students that need learning accommodations, they might tell the school about that. So you might get notified with like a letter at the beginning of the semester, you know, the student will get extra time on exams or whatever. You know, those are helpful, but they might not be adequate. And a lot of students may not tell anybody that they need these kinds of accommodations, or they might not know. So universal design is a way to design courses from the start that take a lot of these considerations out. So you're designing things that are accessible to all right from the beginning. You know, and this doesn't take away the challenges that those other situations provide 100%, of course not, but it's a great start for making courses that are more accessible and available for anyone, any learner. All right, what else? Right, and I mean, this doesn't have to be like super specific fancy teaching jargon. It could just, you know, any thoughts that you might have about, you know, things related to teaching values, how students learn, things you want to bring into your course, teaching practices you've seen. Yeah, sure. What? Sorry.
Diversity in our teaching, in our teaching aids.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in the teaching aids and methods. Yeah.
Say content too, right?
Yeah.
How are you representing you and your students through your teaching? How are you being mindful of who's in your classroom?
And also we could include our project based assignment or something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
To
so that's another
yeah
abbreviation. Yeah. So that, again, this is the jargony term for it, but using projects in your teaching, getting students to collaborate, right? Collaboration.
Collaborative learning. Yeah.
Yeah. Collaborative learning. Another term is peer learning, or, you know, peer review could be something
you
use a lot. Yeah, for sure. Thanks. Someone else was going to say something.
That was me, and I was going to say project-based learning.
Oh.
You got to it before I said it.
On the same wavelength.
Yep.
Perfect. So hands-on learning is in the chat. Of course, yeah, hands-on learning. You know, if you're looking to teach labs, or you've taught lab courses before, that's a reason why lab courses exist, right? Because you can, you know, get the real experiences of that hands-on type of work. We'll just get a few more. Active learning.
I think one important thing, talking about neurodiversity in the classroom and addressing needs of all students is, of course, you know, the types of approaches described in Universal Design for Learning, but also like advocating for the students' needs within the institution and the administratively, like you know, making sure that there's quiet spaces for students who are overloaded by sensory input, things, you know, things like that, that aren't necessarily built into how you design your syllabus, but are important for your student success.
Right, thanks, Amalia. Yeah, and that goes hand in hand with those universal design for learning. That's, you know, a lot of those standards that they have address those as well. But I captured that as attention to neurodiversity, which I hope sums up what you were saying, Amalia. Yeah, real world, I'm going to put that down here. Real world connections. That's super important. I mean, in general, but if you look at any of the, you know, some publications that are coming out for what, you know, why are students getting disengaged from courses today? Like, what do today's generation of students want? And it's definitely how can this help me get a job? How will this help me when I'm, on the job market or working or in the real world? So any way you could make that come through in your teaching and course design is important as well. All right, awesome. So we filled up our slide. So that's a good start. And like I said, I'll unhide the lists that we came up with the last 2 times I gave this presentation. So you'll have a huge list of places to start if these things resonate with you. All right. Thanks, everyone. Those are great. So these are some common questions that I get when I'm reviewing drafts or giving these types of presentations. So we'll just go through some of them. I think I might have answered a couple already throughout. And then, of course, if anyone has anything to add, other questions or other considerations that I didn't mention, please do so. So what if I don't have much teaching experience, right? Whether you're a grad student applying for jobs or a postdoc applying to jobs specifically, and especially in STEM disciplines, it's totally reasonable that you might not have a ton of classroom teaching. I know a lot of examples of folks that went through STEM programs in grad school. They did grading for their TA assignments twice and then didn't have an opportunity to teach as a postdoc. So what the heck are you supposed to do? I strongly encourage you to partake in teaching professional development however you can. Of course, CELT is here, and most universities have a faculty center, a place like CELT, where you can get help, take workshops. There's lots of online courses, and you can explain that you've done these things both in your CV and in your teaching statement, that you've been intentionally spending time and thinking about how your classroom practice will be, how you will reflect and improve, and how you will elicit learning from your students and make sure that's happening. So you can lean on that. There's sometimes you'll have to submit multiple types of statements, a research statement, a diversity statement, which are becoming less required, I think, in the current climate, and then your teaching statement. So you have to keep these different statements distinct, but let's say you've done mentoring over summer programs or mentoring in the lab you work in for undergrads or for new grad students that are thinking of coming in. So in those cases, right, a lot of the mentoring you do might be teaching. If you're teaching how to do protocols or new things in the lab, or you're teaching content to a summer program in STEM, that's teaching experience, right? It doesn't have to be you taught a 3-credit biology lecture to 100 students and that's the only thing that counts as teaching. There's lots of different things that do count. So lean on those experiences as well, talk them up and say how you will elaborate on that and take the things you've learned into full classrooms. Yes, and individual lectures if you've done guest lecturing, and that's another fantastic way to get some experience. If your PIs or mentors are open to it, you might be able to give guest lectures in their classes if you haven't done so or haven't thought about that yet. Prepare content on something that you're familiar with, something that you're doing research on, and you can actually get quite a comprehensive experience through one lecture, right? You can pepper in activities, you could connect it to your research and bring in stories, and then talk about those things, conduct formative assessment where you're gathering feedback from students after this lecture or throughout the active learning you're doing. And you can certainly include that in your teaching statement. So I covered this a bit in just the quick tips, but right, we know that committees are getting tons of these statements, and how do you stand out from other applicants? And it's, what I mentioned before, you want to make sure the statement's well written, that it flows, that it's, reads well, and that you're telling your story, that you open with something that's going to hook your reader in. And I think this is why it's really important to get feedback on the drafts you give. You might be writing in a rush or, nervous about the application process, and it's always good to get, well, if somebody reads it, is it going to make sense to them, right? And getting feedback is the only way to know that ahead of submitting. But really bringing in those personal experiences is the way that it's going to make your story different from others. And I don't mean like, you don't have to talk about your trauma or anything like that, or get super emotional through your teaching statement, but Do you have students that have given you great feedback? Do you have a story about a time you did something in the classroom and it worked, or a learning experience you had that really made you want to do things differently, or do the same thing if you had some really inspiring mentors in your past? But you don't want to make the whole statement about them, right? The statement is totally about you and your experience and the awesome things that you have done and plan to do to bring forward into the institution you're applying to. Are detailed technical approaches in the classroom required in the statement? So to an extent, yes, right? You need to show that you can come into the classroom, you have a plan, or you're leaning on your teaching experience to, again, carry that forward in the new institution. Now, overall, right, you don't need to give every single detail of every single class you've taught, but for these examples that you're picking deliberately, or the values or the course context, the specificity of it, again, is how you're going to stand out. You're not just going to broadly talk about that, you want your students to be thinking critically and whatever, but this is how I've done it, or what I plan to do. This is how my students responded to it, or how I will get my students to respond to it, right? So again, you might not have to go into a whole laundry list of details or provide every piece of detail around something, but you should definitely be specific and have that evidence on hand. Should I include DEI elements in my teaching statement? So I did mention before, right, you might still have to submit both a diversity statement and a teaching statement. And of course, those things are separate in what they're asking you to show, but there might be overlapping pieces, especially if inclusive teaching is like your biggest value for teaching, right? So a lot of the DEI elements are going to come through there. So yes, if that is your value, okay. But again, right, we're in a weird climate right now where maybe not every institution values those things. So unfortunately, you do have to take that a bit into account when you're applying. But you shouldn't have to compromise your values. But I know that's not always 100% reality sometimes, right? But yeah, I mean, inclusive teaching is important. And how are you, however you're going to address that in the classroom, you should definitely include that. But again, if the diversity statements, and I think you had a whole nother session on this, and Carrie Ann knows a lot more about these than I do, but that might also ask you to show a little bit about how you might mentor and incorporate more largely into a department related to DEI, and not necessarily only about teaching. So it's good, to have that element in your teaching statement as well. But again, you just want to make sure the two things don't overlap too much. Yeah, I don't have a wonderful answer to that question, and I certainly hope that does not happen large scale. But I think that's something we're going to have to perhaps battle with in the future. And if anyone else in this room has a better recommendation than I do, please, speak up. Like I said, I never want to encourage anyone to compromise on their values, and clearly we need these things, right, in the classroom, so we can support everybody that's learning. But I think sometimes too, just like changing the language a bit, if that would happen, there's universal design from learning doesn't have any DEI related language in it, right? So you're talking about it from an evidence-based course design framework. So that might be a way to go, right? But you're still showing that you're going to be supporting all learners and that these things are important to you. And then the last one, can I incorporate positive comments received about my teaching in the statement? Yes, absolutely. If you have, snippets from teaching evaluations or things that your students have said, get their permission to use them. You don't have to say their names, but even if you're putting it in anonymously, I would still ask the student if you can, use their comment. But again, you don't want it to take up a big bulk of your statement, because this is supposed to be about how you're going to do things in the classroom based on your teaching values. So I would keep it pretty concise, but yes, that can absolutely be part of that evidence for, right, like I did this activity, this is what my students thought about it, this is the comment I received. All right, Carrie Ann has in the chat, thank you. If equity, inclusiveness are values you hold, you might want, yeah, exactly, right? Like, again, the job market is tough, and I know, getting hired is hard, but if that's not the place you want to be, I think that's really something to strongly consider, because, you're going to have to deal with that culture every day. And you want to be able to bring your passions and core values into the important work that you're doing to support students.
I also think, to that point, like, it's important to always be conscious of the fact that certain institutions will have certain stances officially, and they'll be their talking points. But that doesn't mean that all individuals who might be on the hiring committee and all individuals who would be your colleagues necessarily align their internal beliefs with the speaking points of that university. And I think that's something to consider when considering jobs and considering how you craft your statement, because you may be addressing something that many people who would be assessing whether to hire you or not may hold internally, even though it may not be the speaking point of the institution. That being said, I think Carrie-Ann's point is a good one. What types of institutions do you want to align yourself with? But we don't always have the maximal amount of choice in that matter.
Right, exactly. Yeah, thanks, Amalia. Right, and this is like another reason to try and really dig into those department websites. If there's syllabi from courses and you see all the syllabi in the biology department have like an inclusivity statement in them, right? That might mean, the department values these things, again, as Amalia said, even if the university language isn't showing that that's something that's a priority, or vice versa, right? So it's sort of another way you can gain some information ahead of time. All right, thanks everyone. So I have just some quick questions you can ask yourself on a couple of different topics to get started, and then we'll do we're taking a little longer, so I don't know if we're really going to have time for the activity, but it's something you can do on your own anyway, so let's see how far we get here. So in general, about your philosophy, right, we've already talked about this, but what do you believe or value about teaching and student learning? What skills do you want to develop in your students, right? That can help you pick those broad topics that you elaborate on. And right, these are just places you could take yourself through these questions, jot down some quick notes and start to make an outline. Teaching practice, what courses have you developed or been a TA for? What courses or level are you qualified to teach? What teaching methods or strategies do you use and why? How do you approach assessment or collecting evidence of student learning, right? And if you don't have a lot of this practical experience, again, like, what would you plan to do, right? That's showing too that you're being reflective about your teaching. What would you like to teach? What experience do you have from your research and other parts of your career that would make you able to teach a certain course type? What have you learned from your teaching professional development workshops and courses that you want to try out in the classroom? And then how would you assess students on those? Right, so teaching all students is something you might be asked specifically to address. Again, the inclusive teaching practices. How do your identities and experiences and those of your students impact teaching and learning in your classroom, right? So these are just, some of these are more specific and some of the questions are more broad. But again, this is meant to be just an exercise to jot down some notes to get you started. Research and mentoring. As I said, you can draw on experiences in here that could be considered teaching. How do your research and disciplinary contexts influence your teaching, right? Do you plan to build a syllabus off of primary source, academic literature instead of using a textbook? If you're teaching a lab course, maybe you could do a cure lab where, all the cure labs in the country are feeding into the same sort of big experiment. There's one, and if you don't know what a cure lab is, it's a course-based undergraduate research experience. So it incorporates authentic research in the context of a lab course. These are being developed more and more, and it's a great way to get large numbers of undergrads that might not have had access to more individually mentored research experiences through courses. And there's one lab that I think they take local soil samples and analyze for, the bacteria and things that are in it, and it feeds into sort of this larger national database, right? So is that something that you know, you're interested in, and really bridging the gap between the research and learning experiences, and what experiences might you have mentoring undergraduates in the lab, summer research experience students, etc. Okay, so this was the activity I had planned to do, which we needed about 15 minutes for, and we have about 14 minutes left. So I think we can just open brainstorm a little bit. I was going to put everyone in breakout rooms, but let's just do this together. And I have 3 other questions on the following slide, which you can just give bullet points for. You don't have to elaborate on these. But again, I intended this so if you do start writing your draft soon, you could come back to the previous like reflection slide, but also these 3 questions, and write out more elaborate answers, and that'll give you a really good place to get started assembling these different pieces into your longer statement. So I did create a Padlet, which is a cool online tool that kind of looks like Pinterest. And I'll show you that in a minute, because we can just take a few minutes and jot down some ideas there. But these are the 3 questions I had. So one, and the purpose of this is to identify what you value as an educator and how you will bring these values to your students to help them succeed. Molly loves Padlet. Yeah, it's a great tool. It's super fun and easy to use. But again, you're allowed 3 free Padlets forever, and that's it. So I kind of have to save them and keep deleting them if you don't want to pay for it. So reflect on what elements of teaching are most important to you. Again, think of your time as a student if you don't have a lot of teaching experience to lean on, or the classes you've taught so far and what you've learned from them. So you could pick one value and add this to our Padlet. And then how would you bring this to your teaching? And the more specific you can be for making the statement yours and connected to your stories, the better. So the second question, to practice making it personal and connect what you do to evidence that it is effective. Share a brief story about a successful, I don't know what this or is here for, teaching or learning experience you've had. How did you know it was successful, right? Did you collect evidence from your students? Did they tell you? Did they get good grades? Was engagement high during the activity? Like, how did you know this was working? Or from a learning perspective, right? How did you know you were learning something? Did you get a good grade? Were you able to do a project? Whatever. And then be specific and try to give your story a beginning, middle, and an end. And clearly you're not going to put all of that on the Padlet right now. You can just put a bullet point or 2 related to that. And then the third is in order to be able to convey how you'll reach all of your students and support their success. What does an inclusive classroom or inclusive teaching mean to you? And how do you teach all students equitably, which is not the same thing as equally. Equity is what we should be striving for here, right? So a couple of bullet points related to that. So I'm just going to open up the Padlet, which I have over here. So it looks like this. I put the same questions in here. I'll let everybody scan that QR code. We can just take a few minutes to jot down some ideas, or again, if you want to just shout them out. But I created the Padlet so that, again, you would have like a shared collection of things that you've written together that you can look back to for inspiration for writing your draft. And so if you're going to add something, you can use these plus signs. So I'll just put an example subject, active learning. And you publish it and it pops up here. And then if you like it, you could give it a little heart, right? So my intention was to have everybody put some stuff up here, review each other's answers, and heart react to the things that resonate with you. So let's just take a few minutes and brainstorm together. I'll keep the Padlet up so you can see the ideas popping up on the screen too. And then again, I'll take or export this into some way I can share it with you. And then you can have these ideas for when you write. And then I'll just come back to my last slide after this. Some great stuff so far. All right, so, please continue typing if you're not 100% complete yet, but there's lots of great ideas on here so far. Right, thinking about the connections you have with your students, publicizing internships, right, thinking about other experiences and resources you can share with your students outside the classroom that might contribute to their success, or how to bring those things into the classroom, right, guest speakers from the internships program, or having library folks come in and teach about how to do research, right, thinking about those other connections. Yeah, the growing project is awesome, using podcasts, sharing a photo to tell a story, news or real life examples that relate to the course or the lesson that day, concept maps, drawings, introducing myself, telling students about myself, my strengths, my weaknesses, awesome, right? How can you support them? You're letting them know you care about them. Explaining the why, not just the because. And I like this to review the syllabus with students. Maybe they all have an exam one week and you need to shift something around, or there's, a holiday that you didn't account for, or other things going on, and you can reevaluate. So again, involving your students in those important course decisions, making them feel like they have agency over their learning and that you actually care what's going on in their lives is a huge step to successful teaching and learning. Awesome. So again, you have access through the QR code here, but if I have to delete this, I'll make sure I put it in a different format so I can get that out to you as well afterwards. Thanks everybody for participating. And you have those, these questions here. Again, you can come back to them when you start writing. And then, so just some next steps. Decide what these main pieces you want to drive your statement are, whether you're going by course type, or these more values and goals, teaching strategies, variety of structure, why you value them, why are they effective and important, or describing your course context, right? Add your anecdotes and evidence. So what have you done? What will you do? How will you know your students are learning? Right, and then get feedback on your draft as you write it. And you can reach out to me directly. I would be happy to review drafts when you have them. I put up, like I said, just 4 possible things you can cite. And this is, of course, not comprehensive in any way. It's just some things that I have cited in many, many different contexts. And I sort of put the things that relate to the paper or publication. So this, How People Learn, is a very long PDF that summarizes like decades of seminal research in cognitive sciences and how people learn, as the title says. But things like metacognition, motivation, novice versus expert learning, content retention strategies. If you're talking about those, right, you would cite just as you would cite like in an introduction to a research paper. This one here is good for active learning, encouraging diverse opinions, prompt feedback, peer-peer connections, peer instructor communication. Number 3 is sort of a catch-all and a lot of inclusive and equitable engagement strategies, active learning. And then this is more course design, but some job descriptions say that they want you to contribute to curriculum development, or you get to design a new course. So this will lend evidence to the fact that you can do those things. And in a tenure track faculty position at a large research institution, again, it could be less important to do this, but I think having a couple of citations in there just, lends to that evidence that you've been doing your due diligence and really thinking intentionally about your teaching. And then certainly if the whole job is teaching and you're at a teaching focused institution, this will be valued even more. And then I just have some additional resources here that you can explore that have other advice, examples, blah, blah, blah. And my contact information is at the bottom. Stop sharing. I'd be happy to take any last minute questions in these last 2 minutes. But again, thanks for being here and spending your hour, hopefully learning something that you can use.
Thank you so much, Kim. That was awesome. So if I can just share some quick reminder for next week. Let me just share this in the chat. Next week in our series is diversity statements. It's going to be on Thursday, June 20th from 11 to 12 p.m. And it's going to be the same Zoom link that we're using today. So I just posted the flyer with the RSVP link in the chat now. Okay, awesome. Well, have a great day, everybody. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you.
You.
Bye.
Bye.